How many times have you wanted to volunteer, offer to help someone you see struggling, or speak up about injustice, but you stopped yourself? Why are you hesitating? Fear, maybe shame or guilt? Those emotions are coming from your ego, and your ego is not a good enough reason to hide your light. Today is the day that you take that step to empower others. Today you will recognize what you have in common with those living unstable lives. You have discovered Empower by Example with Laura Rock, where we are redefining traditional philanthropy, and we need your help. Listen here for new ideas, programs that are pushing boundaries, moving the needle, and creating real change. We will be giving you action steps, and we want to hear your takeaways. I'm Laura Rock, and this is Empower by Example. Thank you so much for joining us again on Empower by Example. My name is Laura Rock, and I am with the Rock Family Foundation, and today we are joined by Heather Arnett, and she is the Executive Director for the Women and Girls Foundation in Southwestern Pennsylvania. Hi Heather, how are you?
I'm good, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, I can't wait to talk about all of the exciting things you guys are doing. Great, it's a beautiful sunny day here, and we are going to be talking about Femisphere Code Switch. But before we get into that, I wanted to just ask a few questions to familiarize our audience with you and your work a little bit. So tell me, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Miami, Florida.
Oh wow,
yeah.
This is a switch then.
Yes, in fact, moving to Pittsburgh, I had to do my own form of code switch, yes.
I imagine.
Especially, the first time I came to Pittsburgh, it was the 90s, so Pittsburgh wasn't even the Pittsburgh it is now.
Not nearly, not even a little. So why did you come to Pittsburgh?
I came to go to Carnegie Mellon.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
Awesome. What did you major in?
I have my degree in literary and cultural studies and a minor in directing from the drama department.
Okay, so you are super familiar with cameras.
I am,
awesome.
Yes, yeah.
And did you stay in Pittsburgh?
No, so after I graduated, I moved to New York, and I directed theater and for, no money, but did
for fun.
Well, not for fun, I mean, that was what I was there for.
Right.
So I directed some really wonderful work, working in 42nd Street and Harold Klarman Theater and the Fringe Festival and Women's Expressive Theater. But when you're working in New York, unless you're working on Broadway as a director, you're not making really any money. So what I did in New York for my job, was working as a director in advertising, right, and producing commercials and working for advertising agencies. And then at the time it was the 90s, and so there were all these .coms being born every day and born and dying like little supernovas. And so I kind of accidentally ended up being involved in all these brand launches because as a theater person, right, that's what I knew how to do, was really produce things and create something from nothing. And so so in New York, I was directing theater, I was involved in the advertising agency and brand launches and business development, and was doing that for about 5 years, and then ended up coming back to Pittsburgh 5 years later. I got engaged to my now husband, who lives here, and took the job as Director of Development of City Theater.
Okay, great.
So sort of merging theater and the development work I was doing in the private sector.
And how long
to
were
take
you
that job.
doing that?
So then I was at City Theater for 5 years, and about four or 5 years. And at the same time while I was at City Theater, there I was learning, of course, nonprofit development. I was still doing my own directing, which is more feminist, activist, political than what was happening at City Theater at the time. Though they're doing really wonderful work right now, especially. I think really
They've
just
had this,
Reggie
renaissance.
is doing a lot of really wonderful, timely political work. I'm really a fan of what he's doing over at City now. But at the time, just when I was the Director of Development at City Theater, I think the work there was maybe a little bit less political, but my heart is around women's rights and human rights. And so anyway, so I was doing a lot of my own work independently, was working at the Warhol Theater, the Warhol and different museums, and doing performance work, and Three Rivers Arts Festival commissioned me to do something called Yo Mama, which was about new motherhood. And so right around that time, the Women and Girls Foundation was just getting started. And someone encouraged me to apply to become the executive director. And it was just an interesting, I think, kind of confluence of timing.
Now, I know this story, but I think our listeners are really going to want to hear it. Can you tell us how it was founded?
Sure. So it was founded by a group of really diverse, amazing women who just came together and said it was really important for there to be a women's fund here in our community. So in the late 90s, Teresa Hines had given a speech at a Women in Philanthropy conference in Philadelphia, and where she commented, just as an aside, how she thought it was strange and unfortunate that there wasn't a women's fund in Southwest Pennsylvania. There are a lot of them around Philadelphia. And there were a few women in that audience, one of them being Cecile Springer and one of them being Patricia Ulbrich. Cecile at the time was the president of the Westinghouse Foundation, and Pat was an academic at University of Pittsburgh. And they studying different aspects of women's history and social research. And anyway, they came back and they said, well, this is a really good, important question. And so they started to talk to other women. And so Pat and Cecile, Hilda Peng Fu, Kathy Raphael, Judy Ruskowski, Marlene Gary Hogan came together, and Sue Chursky, and they created the Women and Girls Foundation. You know, as you might be hearing, they aren't big time, famous people, philanthropists. They aren't Mellons, Carnegies, Hineses, Scapes. We didn't start with an endowment. We still don't have one. When they hired me, they had $50,000 in the bank and were doing grants. And so we were, from the beginning and still are, a very grassroots organization. We're a public charity, right? So we're called the Women and Girls Foundation, but we really are a public charity, not really a foundation, like a private family foundation. But we're committed to not just raising money to do our own programming and advocacy work. We're committed to also raising additional funds so that we can invest in other people's grassroots advocacy efforts as well.
And I just love that, because I feel like, especially in Pittsburgh, you have so many nonprofits in this space. And I just think that your mission just shines so brightly, exactly what you do. You're like this beacon, like, no, this is what we're doing, and everything that we touch is going to involve this. And no, we didn't have an endowment. This is something that we're cheerleading every single day and fundraising, but in a way, I don't know, it doesn't come off as fundraising so much. It just comes off as, this is all of the amazing work that we're doing. Don't you want to be a part of it?
Thank you. Yeah, and the mission's so big, everyone has to be part of it, right? Because the mission's to achieve equality for women and girls.
Right.
And we aren't there yet. And we especially weren't there when they first started. And when I was hired 15 years ago, the state was ranked 48th out of the 50 states for women's representation in politics. We had one of the worst wage gaps in the country. We still have one of the highest infant mortality and maternal mortality rates in the country, especially for women of color. We have very high cancer rates, air pollution. I mean, there's just, so many things that especially impact women and girls. And we didn't have a foundation, right? Especially looking at and sort of doing grant investing and advocacy work with that gender lens. And so that's why I especially appreciate what the founders did, because they said, yes, this region is really rich in philanthropy, and that's incredibly important, but it's also important that there's an entity looking at these things with the gender lens. And even if we're a tiny little butterfly, if we move our wings in that way, maybe we can help shift the wind so that the bigger entities will also start to look that way. And that's what we've done with Femisphere. We are very small, but in 2014, we started this Femisphere initiative by doing the Femisphere report. In 2016, we released it where we said, look, 76, in 2004, when we first did our Status of Women in PA report, 73% of households living in poverty in Pittsburgh were single female heads of households. By 2014, that had gone up to 76%. That's not the right direction, right? But when we released that report in 2016 and said 76% of households living in poverty are led by single moms, some of the larger entities in town said, oh, that can't be right. That doesn't sound right. Some or other organizations said, that's terrible. We need to do something. We want to partner with you to do something, right? And so we were really emboldened and touched and strengthened because organizations like the Hillman Foundation said, okay, we want to do something. And they made a huge investment in launching Femisphere to the next level. And they made a large investment in our work. And so that's been the last couple of years, we've really been able to focus on Femisphere and do things like the code switch and other kinds of initiatives. And one of the most important things we've been doing is banging that drum and saying people need to put single moms at the center of conversations around poverty reduction. People need to be putting single moms at the center of conversations around economic development. And now here we are in 2019, and we've seen some very large organizations in our community, right? The mayor's office, the county chief executive, the Pittsburgh Foundation, all sorts of organizations really talking about single moms. And that's great, because that's what we want to see. And I think that's been one of the most important impacts of the Femisphere initiative.
Absolutely. And I think that when you're ahead of the curve like that, and you have people saying that can't be right because we're doing all of this data over here, and you're like, if you yell it loud enough and consistently enough and have people like Hillman backing you, that's going to really carry your message in an important way. But let's tell our listeners what Femisphere is, because I think it's amazing. And I want to tell you, like, the mural in your office, can I have a picture of it? Because it inspires me. It inspires me just to see it that way. And like, I've started to approach my own work in that way somewhat, where I'm just like, let me just make a little
it's good to
ecosystem.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So can you tell us about it?
Sure. So Femisphere is a way of thinking, right? So we think about, a biosphere, which we learn about when we're kids in science class. So a biosphere is a whole system that has everything that you need for life to grow, right? So you think of like those glass biospheres you can buy, glass domes, right? For your kid, there's a little one, or you could think of like a scientist who go and live in a biosphere. So a biosphere is a whole system that has everything it needs for life to live and thrive. So a Femisphere is a whole system that has everything needed for women and girls to thrive. So we start out with this premise and this question, which is Pittsburgh a Femisphere? And if it isn't, what do we need to make it so, right? What are the things that are missing? What are the systemic gaps? So we can think about this whole community, this whole city, this whole region as a Femisphere. So we put women at the center, right? Not on the side. So it means that all decisions should be made in that way. So if you're thinking about transportation plans, if you're thinking about a workforce development initiative, put her at the center, not on the side. So, when I meet with someone and they say, well, we developed this construction training program, but women aren't coming. And I'll say, well, do you have childcare provided? Oh, well, no. But we have this picture of a woman with a hard hat on our brochure, right?
So she sees herself in it.
So that she'll see herself.
Can she get there?
But if your brochure says childcare provided, right, transportation provided, right, then you're solving these problems for her. But if you're not solving these problems, then you're just creating these problems for her, right? And saying you need to solve these things before you can even come to our construction program, right?
Which is built for you.
But it isn't.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So think about her when you're creating it. So Femisphere, we looked at, right, all those things. What are all the things that moms need, right? They need childcare, they need transportation, right? They need reproductive health care, they need affordable housing. Yes, they need all these things. What certainly we heard from them, childcare is so up there at the top, of course, right? But they really need this intersection, this intersectionality. We talk a lot about intersectionality around demographics, that's right, but what Professor Crenshaw was also talking about, what she was talking about was thinking about the intersections, right? When things are intersecting in people's lives. That means think about when race and poverty and gender are intersecting. That means the inequities that impact me are not just one, right? So that's what we're talking about.
My neighborhood doesn't have fresh groceries and all of these different things. Or doesn't have this transportation
and also, like,
route.
if you are poor single mom, if you're a poor single mom who's Black, if you're a poor single mom who's Black and has a disability, if you're a poor single mom who's Black, who's gay and has a disability, like all of those are going to be intersecting, right? Intersecting identities, intersecting realities, intersecting forms of inequity that impact your life. And if somebody actually wants to serve you or think about you, then they need to be thinking about all those parts
Not just one
of your
lens.
life, not just one, right?
Right.
So that's what Femisphere is from this big picture piece. And then we have grantees and partners who we've worked with on different components.
Okay. And one of those components was Code Switch.
Yeah.
And that was one that we sponsored because, I'll be honest with you, the reason that we sponsored it, I'd heard about Femisphere and I was looking at the mural, so I was impressed. And you mentioned Code Switch, and this is something from my old life, software, where I was just like, oh, you're doing a hackathon. Oh, that sounds amazing. Oh, I know how to do those. This sounds great. And then you had this other element to it that carried through the entire experience of not only are we going to have this hackathon to build something for single moms in poverty and the resources that they need and how to make it easier for them to access them, to sum it up really simply, and I'll let you explain probably broader what the intention was there, but the thing that just rang to me was we are going to do it asking them what they want, letting them direct it, letting them navigate, letting them have a say the entire way through, which I've never seen a hackathon done like that before, where the end user was so focused, it was so focal, and so many conversations were happening from the end user that it was just this, very bright, fresh air. Like, it was just beautiful. It was just like, you really did have them right in the middle of it. So what inspired you to do Code Switch? What did you hope it would, bring about?
So we at Women and Girls Foundation, I think, have always had this ethos of, making sure that whoever programs are for, that those individuals are involved in creating the program, right?
Wild.
So from the beginning, I joined the organization in 2004, and our organization is called Women and Girls Foundation. And so I had looked around the room to the founders and said, well, I see a lot of women.
Where
are the girls? Right? So one of the first things we need to do is figure out, where are the girls? What are we doing for girls, with girls? Where's the girls' leadership at this organization? So I contacted two of the women who were sort of involved with us or in the field that I knew, who had daughters that seemed really cool and smart. Sylvia Fields at Eden Hall, whose daughter at the time was Jetty, not at that time, but she was little, right? Jetty Fields, who was a seventh grader, I think, at the time. And then Susan Blackman, whose daughter Emma Blackman Mathis was also an early age high schooler. And I asked them, would Emma and Jetty be interested in meeting with me? So they came to the office and I said, what do you think we should do? This is who we are as an organization. Anyway, so from that conversation came about this idea of doing girls as grant makers, because we were grant makers. And so then they gathered a bunch of other girls, and those girls created our girls program. And then they created it completely, right? What the program was, what the rules were, what the application looked like. The applications went out, they reviewed them, they interviewed the girl, all of it. Fast forward, we have this program, GirlGov now, right? GirlGov is what evolved out of that, because the girls at some point said,
we want to be represented.
We want to do this trip to Harrisburg. We want to shadow legislators. Anyway, fast forward, it becomes GirlGov, which is what the girls created. That program now involves 165 girls from 62 schools, 7 counties. The girls still lead it. They elect their own advisory council. They lead their meetings. They continue to lead and evolve that program, right? So even before Code Switch, right, this has been our MO, which is you don't create something for somebody else, right? They create it. So when we hired Sadvika Netty to come on to our team and she was hired to help us work on the tech solution component of Femisphere.
Got it.
And we had sort of a line item to have an app or some sort of technology to assist moms. Satvika talked to us about how she did this hackathon at Carnegie Mellon. And so it was her idea to do the hackathon. And she said, this is how hackathons work. You bring users and coders together, and they come up with solutions together. And this seems like critically important, because how do we even know what moms want? How do we even know an app is what would be best for them? How do we know what we don't know
Maybe
anything.
It's a website, maybe it's a phone call.
Right, we need to bring the moms to the table. And we said, you're absolutely right. Go with it.
Do it.
Right. So, and that is also the culture of Women and Girls Foundation. We had just hired Satvika. We were her first job out of college, out of undergrad, and I said, great, go with that idea.
Right.
So this was her baby. She had to raise more money because, of course, to do a full-thrown hackathon is much more than just, a line item to implement an app, but so much more in the core values of Women and Girls Foundation, of Femisphere, so much more in the end effective. In that way, the whole process of Code Switch was itself fulfilling Femisphere.
So thoughtful.
Even before the app even happens.
Absolutely. You had the childcare on site, food on site.
Yep.
You had transportation provided.
Always.
Uber was a sponsor. You had just people were available to the moms, the end users, to answer their questions. You had it was almost like, I think that they were called mentors, and I believe in the end they were almost like translators, right? Where they were like able to talk very tech language, but then they were taking the conversations from the moms and just making sure that everything kind of came together, and it was really beautiful and lovely.
Yeah, and it was so exciting to see, the folks who are involved in coding and sort of tech land or graphic design, or listening to moms who are the experts and just taking the time to listen to the moms who would be the end users around what their needs would be, and then digesting that information and then coming back with their end product recommendations.
The entire facilitation from the beginning, from that first meeting, which there weren't other sponsors there, I was just overly excited. I was like, I can't wait to hear what the moms have to say. This is great, and the whole room working together. The coders are working and thinking and talking. The mentors are there, and the moms. And then it was it wasn't just deficits. I really appreciated that about that program. It was highlighting everything that goes into being a single mom, and just talking about the assets and talking about the love and talking about the connections and the connections that they were able to form with each other right in that room. Yeah. And I walked to the parking lot, a few times with coders after whatever meeting had happened, and they were just like, never been in one of these like this before. I've never experienced something like this before, where we get to hear real reactions in real time. It's not about a finished product, it's about the absolute best concept that works for the mom.
Yeah, and really, we are so grateful to all the work and sort of dreamscaping and then implementation that Satvika put into it, and to the work that Heather Hobson from Single Mom Defined put into it around helping us reach out to moms. And that was so key, because we had 40 moms involved, and
great.
And to our community at Google and Carnegie Mellon and Uber and MDB, and just I just think it takes a community, it takes a village, and everybody really showed up.
Yeah, they did. So what do you hope comes next after Code Switch?
Well, so now we go to the next step, right? So we awarded prizes, and now we have some money set aside to go into implementation. And of course, it's not clear if it's enough money to fully implement the idea, because as you saw, people come up with an idea, they present their concept, they haven't exactly, I think, really budgeted out what it really takes. So we're now setting up meetings with folks at the county, because if you might remember, the winning concepts really were around almost like this
resources.
Yeah, it's around resources. A lot of them are related to the county.
Right.
It's not quite a Google search. It's sort of like Google search meets Yelp meets,
Right, you know, the reviews.
It meets the county DHS, you know. So we really want to connect the winning teams with the county and talk about how can we connect and help and ask them to come back with a real budget, and then get a sense of, is the money we have set aside enough for them to design it, you know, to actually develop it. If not, what else has to be raised?
Right.
And then, you know, are there other partners who are willing to invest in the creation of the app itself? And is the county interested in then sustaining it moving forward?
Maintaining it.
Exactly.
Because that's a huge part of it. And,
Yeah.
you know, I don't think we could ask for a more tech-driven DHS than what we have here in Allegheny County. It's really remarkable.
Absolutely. And they are the perfect partner to maintain it and keep it going.
Absolutely.
You know, Women and Girls Foundation is not interested in, you know, inserting ourselves in that process.
You don't need the ego, right?
Right.
I don't need to own it.
No, we don't need to own it, and we don't need, you know, we want to be helpful, right? Not trying to complicate things, right? We want to make things easier for the moms, and I think the more streamlined we can make all these processes, the better. But it definitely seems like one of the things that was exciting was when you do create these processes like the hackathon outside of a government structure, I think you get to see a little bit more creativity and, you know, than you might see just within a like government RFP process.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. So we had so many volunteers here. How were you putting the call out for volunteers for that event?
How did we?
Was it like social media? Like where were people looking?
I mean,
they were just picking up, telling a friend, word of mouth?
All sorts of, I know that Suffolk was banging the drums on social media and the alumni network and
nice.
Absolutely, yeah. And through Women and Girls Foundation's newsletters, and yeah, absolutely.
And so is that a good place for people to find volunteer opportunities with you, the newsletters? What do you think the best way is?
The newsletter and on Facebook, you know, when we're going to our website and signing up for our newsletter is a great way, because we always are, you know, formally putting out posts that way. Also following us on Facebook is great, or Twitter or Instagram. We're on all of those mediums.
Socials.
All of those.
Socials.
Yeah.
We'll definitely post those links in the show notes.
Great.
For sure. Great. So tell me, this is only, we've talked about Femisphere, we talked about GirlGov, we've talked about a bunch of different things, but I know that you have policy change at heart, and I'd love to hear what you guys are doing to move the needle in Harrisburg right now.
So yes, let me back up. So the Family Care Act, what it does is, right now, there are a number of other states that have established these paid family and medical leave insurance funds at the state level. And what they do is all employees in that state are paying a tiny amount, it's like less than a penny on the dollar, into a state insurance fund. And then everybody has access to, in many of these states, about 12 weeks of, yes, leave that you can take for to take care of a new infant, but also if somebody else in your family needs care, right? So a mother who's a parent who's broken their hip, an elder who needs care, a child who has asthma, a spouse who has cancer, right? A sibling who has cancer, yourself that you've had a car accident, right? Like anybody who needs care for an illness, or, you know, any kind of medical care for yourself or somebody else in your family. Wow. It's right now in this country, only 14% of workers have access to any kind of paid family or medical leave, but 100% of workers will need it in their lifetime. Every single one of us at some time will need to be cared for, or will need to care for someone.
Makes sense.
100% of us.
Right.
There's not one of us on this planet that at some time will either have a joy in our life of having a new child enter our lives, or will at some time be sick, or have someone in our lives who is sick. It's just not possible to get through humanity without any of those things happening. And yet we still live in a work world that acts like none of those things happen.
Right, or you can't get paid through them.
And, you know, and we live in a world where most Americans can't get past 2 weeks without going into bankruptcy without pay.
Right.
And so, when people talk about, well, there's FMLA,
Right,
the Federal Medical Leave Act only secures your job without pay, and only for companies with 100 workers or more.
Exactly. And so how many of these companies?
First of all, most of us work for companies that don't even have 100 employees.
Right. Not required to have
Right, so we're not
FMLA.
even getting job protection, and also even if we do, it's still unpaid. So that doesn't really help. Because for most folks, if your child ends up in the hospital and you need to take a week off to be with that child at their hospital
You're not
bed.
going to leave the child in
Right.
the hospital to go to work.
But many do.
Ugh.
And so, one of our partners is actually in the coalition is pediatric palliative care. And when they come to talk to legislators, what they talk about is all the children who are in the hospital on their deathbed alone because their parents don't have paid family or medical leave to be able to be with sick and dying children because they don't have paid leave. I mean, that's not the country we want to be living in.
I agree.
And that's why this is an issue that actually polls at over 76% with Democrats, Republicans, independents. In this state, when you tell actually Republican voters that it involves elder care, it goes to 81%. Because people, what we hear, and these are actually the phrases from the polls, people tell us it's the right thing to do, it's so important because family needs to care for family. And so, at this point, folks are not retiring.
Right.
So people are working, into their 70s. Both, all people are working two family incomes, and folks don't want to have to lose their job because somebody in their family is sick or got in an accident or is dealing with an opioid addiction.
Exactly.
And is coming out of rehab
Where are they
and
gonna
needs
go?
to have somebody take care of them for a week or two. So, these are the real issues that families are dealing with in Pennsylvania. And, when people hear paid family and medical leave, they immediately and only think about maternity leave. And that's important. It's certainly important to the Women and Girls Foundation, right? Remember earlier I said we are one of the states with the highest infant and maternal mortality rates.
Right.
And yes, it will help. The average woman in this country goes back to work within 2 weeks of a vaginal birth.
No, thank you.
Right. So when we think about it, we're the only developed nation in the world without paid maternity leave, and we're the only developed nation in the world with escalating infant and maternal mortality rates. Now, these things are not accidentally correlated, right? So yes, it does offer paid maternity leave. Yes, that's important. But it's not the only thing it offers, and it's not the only reason it's important.
It's not the only situation. Got it.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. So those bills are introduced now.
Yeah, so they were just introduced this month, which is
Congratulations.
really exciting. Thank you. And we were really patient because we wanted the right champions and we wanted the right sponsors because, so I mentioned earlier other states have it. New Jersey, New York, Washington,
around
D.C., Massachusetts, Rhode Island, right? Connecticut just passed it. California, of course, they've had it for a dozen years, but what's most relevant is exactly all those states I just mentioned, because that's all happened in the last couple of years, and those are all the states around us. So we didn't want to just introduce this bill just to introduce this bill.
No,
this
you
is
didn't
about
wanna be
making it
early
happen.
too. Right.
So we were patient to get the right sponsors. We really do feel that Senators Laughlin and Collette and Representative Thomas and Miller are the right sponsors to get this bill to make it happen, to move it this session.
That's so exciting.
But we need everybody's help.
Right.
You had asked me, and I'm very appreciative about volunteers. If people go to our website and people look up the Family Care Act, and there's a Facebook page and all of that, sign up for the, you can do text to action, to be able to send, emails encouraging other legislators to sign on as sponsors, to help vote for it, to get it a committee hearing. Folks can just go and talk to their legislators, do a constituent visit, tell their stories, because that's how it will happen.
That's how it happens. I love that. I love that you are able to make an impact on this and move this bill through and have Pennsylvania be, what would it be now, the seventh state?
It'll probably be the eighth or ninth.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the 8th state, and that's something whenever you're looking at those statistics.
Oh, actually, Oregon just did it yesterday.
Oregon.
So actually, we probably will be 10th.
10th, okay.
Which is great. It's a good round number.
10 sounds really good. Whenever you're talking about those statistics you were mentioning earlier of how lagging behind we were, it would be nice to be 10th in something.
It would.
Amazing.
Exactly.
That sounds fantastic. Do you have any questions for me? I know that this can kind of be like...
Yeah. So what made you decide to get into this kind of work?
I had been stressed about wanting to donate a lot of money to different organizations and feeling like when I was donating the money, I would feel really good for approximately, a few days, and then I would kind of like forget about that organization and move on to the next. And it just didn't seem like it wasn't a holistic philanthropy for me, just to be sending checks, and I wanted to find a way to be interacting with programs. But this is kind of the point of the podcast, actually, so I'm glad you asked this question. I felt like I couldn't commit to any one program because as a mom of small children, as someone who, I was a stay-at-home mom, I was just not feeling like I would be able to commit the time, or if for some reason someone had a fever, I would feel so guilty about not making it that time that social anxiety might keep me from going back. So I usually go big or go home, and decided to go big this time. And it was just like, what I can do? I can actually go in and start a foundation that can fundraise, that can pay for programming, that I am actually involved in, that can sponsor awesome events like Code Switch, that can collaborate with other funders to try to amplify. We're not the biggest foundation in town. We're the same. We're not the biggest foundation in town, but isn't it wonderful that we can talk to other organizations and be like, well, I'll chip in this much if you guys will chip in the same, or can I piggyback on what you're doing because I really think it's important. I don't have the funds to start that myself, but I'd like to add to what you're doing and use my social capital however I can in order to further what you're doing as well. So that's how it started. And I'd say it's been 2 years and it's happening.
Great.
Definitely happening. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time today.
No, you're welcome.
You have so many things going on. You're doing just amazing work in this city, and I really admire you and I like working with you. So yeah, I will have to sign up for all of these Facebook things, and I am on the newsletter, and
good.
I'm a member. I was gonna wear my pin. It wasn't gonna sit on here.
No.
I thought about it.
Yeah.
I have that. My daughter wears hers.
Oh, good.
Well, anything that is Wonder Woman related.
Yeah.
That's her jam.
Yeah,
she'd
definitely
really like your
intentional.
office.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If you have questions for Heather or I, you're going to have our contact information, all the socials, all the ways that you can find out what is going on at the Women and Girls Foundation. And we're really excited for you to sign up and, put your money where your mouth is, and maybe just put some hard work in there too, and talk and share and let everyone know what's important to you. And that can be your version of philanthropy. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Were you inspired by what you heard today? What connections can you make that can help this population? Philanthropy is more than signing a check. Funding is important, but your service, social capital, and enthusiasm create true magic. You are more than a person driving a minivan from point A to point B. You have valuable skills and much needed empathy to offer. So subscribe, review, and share this podcast with your friends. Join our Empowered by Example Facebook group to stay connected and maintain accountability. Share your experiences with others, and you will empower by example.